Welcome to Three Count Commentaries. So today we're going to talk about Sami Zayn and supposedly him being in trouble for some pro Palestinian tweets. But we're going to end up talking about pretty much this whole thing because it has grown to encapsulate a bunch of other people like Gal Gadot, who plays Wonder Woman, Charlotte, who knows how many, Andrew Yang, all types of politicians and different things like this. And I'm not an expert on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I just know the history of it. And I think probably one of the smarter things that I've heard about this whole ordeal, in a way, and just to give you like the too long didn't listen version, is you have to ask yourself a question when it comes to like any type of war or war situation. I heard this on Tim Pool, and I thought it was pretty cool. He asked the question. He says, if the Israelis brought down their dome and put down their weapons, what do you think would happen? And then one of the guests was like, the Palestinians or Hamas or whatever would overrun them and kick them out of the country. And then he says, what if you think the Palestinians have put down their weapons and stop shooting rockets? What do you think would happen? And then somebody said, peace. Now that guess is obviously going to end up being biased. So I'm just going to put the question to you. In the comment section below, let me know what you would think would happen if Israelis were to stop firing on Palestinians, or if Palestinians would stop firing on Israelis. If both sides decide to put their weapons down first, what did you think would happen? Now, I don't want to be biased on this situation because I'm not biased. I'm not a Muslim. I'm not a Jew, right? And for the record, you don't have to be Jewish to be Israeli. So we're going to talk about this. There was a report out there that WWE and Fox had been contacted about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict due to Sami Zayn's tweeting. So what did Sami Zayn say? So Andrew Yang 3 days ago put out a statement saying that he supported Israel in these wars or whatever. I'm not going to read Andrew Yang's tweet because it doesn't matter. Plus he walked it back anyway. But this has sort of started the whole Sami Zayn aspect of it. So Sami Zayn said, maybe not the most tasteful statement to make within hours of Israel bombing Gaza and killing 20 Palestinians, 9 of whom were children. But then again, I'm not a soulless piece of shit politician, so what do I know? Then he starts talking about how people can support Palestinians by going to this guy named Joe Gaza. Apparently, he has a yearly fundraiser that gives money to Palestinians. And so later he says, watching politicians and commentators rush to wrap Israeli military aggression in a cloak of victimhood while omitting the crimes towards the Palestinians is beyond shameful. The hypocrisy in the discourse and the callous indifference towards the Palestinian people is appalling. So now, if there is, one thing anybody knows about Sami Zayn is that he's a very proud Muslim. That doesn't necessarily mean he's on the side of Palestinians, but he just happens to be, right? He is of Syrian descent, if I remember correctly. So this thing is not as cut and dry. For starters, do I think WWE would in any way punish or fire Sami Zayn for his tweets? No. Would they take him off TV for a little while? Maybe let all this thing calm down? Maybe. And that's if the report is true and that WWE and Fox have been contacted about this whole Israel-Palestinian thing. At most, they'll send him home for a little while, let all of this cool off. Do I think he'll be fired? Absolutely not. I just don't see it. But, sending them home, not putting them on TV, trying to let all this stuff blow over, sure, I can see them doing that. But a couple of days ago, I'm recording this on May the 14th. So you have Gal Gadot, who was a member of this Israeli Defense Force, which is required as all Israeli citizens. She was attacked. She plays Wonder Woman, obviously, in the movies. And she was attacked on Twitter for being a member of the Israeli Defense Force or being a former member of the Israeli Defense Force. I'm not going to go through all of those tweets. Just know that they were really ugly and really crazy. Charlotte Flair liked a tweet, and people really lost their minds about that too. And it seems that a lot of people have decided to take sides based off of, their perceived view of this situation. And that's, like I said, the situation is very complex. It's insanely complex. And when you look back, and it all comes back to the old childhood thing of I was here first, Oh, well, I was here first. Well, no, we were here first. Well, no, I was here first. And then this is the Holy Land. And it's like, man, who cares? Oh, this is what the important thing between, it goes back to the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So a lot of the Ottoman Empire, for people who don't know, was a big Muslim empire that was in the Mediterranean area. They occupied the area that is now called Israel. Before it was called Israel, it was called something else, but it wasn't called Palestine. Okay. So when the British took it over, they occupied the area like they do with every area that they occupy, like the United States and Australia and every other British colony. They took it over, and this I believe was after World War One. I'm going off memory, by the way, so if my facts are wrong, please feel free to contact me in the comment section below. And once the Jews started having their problems in Europe, because just about every Jewish country or country in Europe started blaming the Jews for for the Great Depression, for various their banking systems and stuff like that. Because the Jews, they do have a system where and it was basically created by the Christians, if we're being honest, where the Christians do not allow lending with interest, but the Jews do. So it was sort of created, they were ghettoized, the Jews, and then they would create these banking systems, and people would come to them to get money, and the Jews would charge interest because, of course, the Jewish law goes that they cannot charge interest to other Jews. That's where, when people start tripping about the whole Jewish banking conspiracy, that's really where they get it, is that Jews can charge interest, but they can't charge interest to other Jews. So there's this idea that Jews are working together to, steal money from the outworld people. And it's not just Muslims, because Hitler thought the same thing, but various Jewish peoples were kicked out of their countries, not just in Germany, but in Germany's satellite countries and in other countries as well. And they had nowhere to go. So the British essentially said, all right, well, we have this area which, apparently belonged to these people already. And, or your old historical homeland or whatever. And then they came back to the area that is now called Israel. And in doing so, it became a tussle between the Israelis and the Muslims. Now, depending on what kind of sources you read, and I've read a few over the course of the last several years, some people have said that the Jews in the area, or the Israelis in the area, actually engaged in a lot of terrorism in order to force the British out. And then once the British were gone, it was just the Israelis and the Muslims. And that's where sort of the modern day bashing of the heads come from. And that sort of thing is like, well, yeah, this is what happened. And then people say, well, you have to go back further. And then there was several hundreds, there was not hundreds, probably several dozen wars that took place after, the Jews occupied this area. And then they started building a society, essentially. And other countries, like especially Muslim countries like Egypt, have tried to invade. They won't take the Palestinians in, but they'll invade on their behalf because they don't want Muslims in that area. This is, again, the old Ottoman Empire, which is now broken up to several different countries. So that's really what we're talking about here, is that a lot of people feel like the Palestinians have been occupied, that they were there first, and then the British brought the Jews in, and then the Jews took over, forced the British out, and now are terrorizing the Palestinians. That's the general idea of what people believe now. And they haven't done themselves any favors when you have the Israeli defense system, like that entire system, where they have weapons provided to them by the British and the Americans. And that's another big issue right there too, is the Palestinians are seen as kind of the underdogs because nobody tries to help them. Nobody will take them in, while the Jews or the Israelis, they're getting weapons from the United States. They're getting weapons from Britain. They were being protected. They're being given billions of dollars a year, which I disagree with. I don't think Israel should get shit in funding. They should deal with this problem themselves. But that's the general idea, is that when you look at Israel, it's very tied to the West. It is one of the daughters, let's say, of the United States and Britain, because it couldn't exist without them at first, because it provided them with all of these weapons and all of this space and all this land. And of course, over the years, they've eaten more and more and more into what was Palestinian land. They would take over more. They built more settlements and different things like that. So over the years, there's been a more of a growth in Israel than it was initially. And because of that, there is no way. And then, of course, there's the whole idea about Palestine being denied statehood, being denied their own country because they believe, because their supporters or their representatives have notoriously been labeled terrorists, like Hamas is being labeled terrorists right now. Of course, terrorism is relative because, like I said, some people see the Palestinians as being the underdogs, and therefore they should be able to be aggressive and try to retake their homes and that kind of stuff. Ultimately, believing in personal responsibility, I have to say that you are responsible if you pick up a weapon and shoot somebody. It has nothing to do with anybody 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. If you pick up a weapon today and you shoot at somebody, that's you making a choice. You don't get to use dead people as like the blood and soil argument. Like, when you talk to people about blood and soil, they'll instantly go back to the Nazi Germany, right? Like, Nazi Germans will say, we want to have a pure state. Our pure state, we can't have Jews here because Jews are not pure. They're disgusting mudbloods or whatever the hell, right? And people will say, like, oh, that's so horrible. Even if you say that today, like Andrew Anglin or somebody like that, would say that the United States should have, or they should at least be some areas that are purely white, where there are no Latinos, no Chinese, no black people, because America is a white country or whatever the hell. They'll say, oh my God, he's a Nazi. But when you talk about mud and blood and soil in terms of the Palestinian conflict, it's A-OK, big thumbs up. You talk about blood and soil in context of Native Americans in Oklahoma or whatever, big thumbs up, it's A-OK. Talk about blood and soil in the context of Africa, big thumbs up. That's all cool. Everybody gets to do blood and soil except white people or people who are perceived to be white, like Jews. Never mind that, the blood and soil. I mean, the blood and soil argument also is, one of the key components to the whole Irish issue in England, because they're occupying Scotland, they're occupying Wales, they're occupying Ireland. These are now countries that are now in the United Kingdom. And, these are occupied territories, but they're white, so nobody cares, right? But if they were occupying brown people, quote unquote, then people would care and they would say blood and soil, blood and soil. And it's like, it's nonsense, okay? You make the decision in your lifetime to whether you're going to throw your life away for this or not. Now, on the flip side, when we say something like it's their responsibility not to be aggressive, and that's just flatly it. It is your responsibility to not be aggressive. Doesn't matter what happened 400 years ago or 100 years ago. It's your responsibility not to be violent. Your responsibility as a living, breathing, sentient being not to be violent. Now, to that point, there will always be people who, as long as Israel exists in that area, there will be people who will say they shouldn't be there. I was even one of those people at one point. I would say, like, why don't they just leave? Like, or I would say things that most smart people would say is, why would the Muslims stay there? Why don't they go into all these other Muslim countries that surround them? And then you find out that the Muslim countries that are surrounding them don't want them, And so they're willing to go in there and fight the Israelis, but they're not willing to take the Palestinians in. And that's really a sad situation when you really think about it, sit down and think about it. And that's what makes this issue so complex. It's because you can't end it by just saying simple things like, why don't all the Palestinians just move to Egypt, or they just move to so-and-so or whatever? Because then those countries would be like, no, 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 we don't want them. They may be Muslims like us, but they're different kinds of Muslims, and we don't want no problem with. We don't want that. We don't want that issue. So they don't want them. You find similar situations in Africa. You find similar situations in other places where they will band together to fight the alien. The person who's different from you. But as far as being like true in brotherhood and want that really help you out, no, absolutely not. They're willing to take up arms to fight the aliens, but that's it. And in this situation, the aliens just happen to be Israelis or Jews or whatever. Similarly, or in the same situation, Israel does have a tremendous military, and they conscript people, which I disagree with. This goes to the Gal Gadot situation. So people who might get tight-assed about Wonder Woman, she pretty much had no choice. It's either you go into the Israeli Defense Force or you go to prison, right? That's kind of how it was in the United States in the past. People don't want to go through that. So she did what she did. That doesn't mean that she went around killing Palestinians. It doesn't mean that she did anything to Palestinians. We don't know what she did in the Israeli Defense Force. She might have been a cook. She might have been a chef. She might have washed windows. We don't know. But ultimately, they feel like you have to serve your country in some way, and therefore they conscript people. Now, I stopped caring about the whole Palestinian-Israeli argument when I saw this documentary. It's called The Heart of Jeanine. And it was about a small Palestinian boy who was throwing rocks at an Israeli defense guy. And the guy didn't know he was throwing rocks. So when he got hit in the head with something, he just turned around and started shooting. And he ended up shooting this Palestinian boy. He was probably like 9. And there's similar stories you hear about these things on the American border about Mexicans. And they'll be throwing rocks at American soldiers on the border. And then the guys will spaz out because they don't know what the hell's going on. They start getting pelted with things. They thinking they're getting shot at. So they turn around and start shooting, and they find out it's a kid throwing rocks at them. For starters, you have to realize that there's somebody putting these kids up to throwing rocks at you. But when you're, on edge, because threats can come from anywhere, you tend to do stuff like that. You tend to turn around and just start blasting. But to go back to this documentary, what ended up happening is the parents of the Palestinian boy, they put his heart up for donation. They say, hey, we'll just donate his organs. And they find out that his heart ended up going into a Jewish girl. And the documentary was all about showing how these Palestinians who wanted to meet this girl who received the gift of their son's hearts, they wanted to know how she was doing and to keep in contact with her. And it was like a big surprise when they found out that the girl was Jewish. And it was like this whole thing of them trying to come together and trying to learn about one another and trying to work through this society that has taught them forever that they should hate each other. And I said to myself, like, the average Jewish person, the average Muslim can get along. It's usually at the top. So when you have Hamas throwing rockets or launching rockets or whatever into Israel, then you have Israel put a button, so then they shooting rockets back. And then, of course, Hamas is hiding among children, which, nobody's ever said they didn't do it. Which, when people say like, oh yeah, they're killing children, it's like, yeah, because they're using children as human shields. And I see it all the time that, they're putting children up to doing things like they're giving them guns to point at people, especially young boys. They're giving them guns. They do it in Africa too, so it's not just a Muslim thing. And they're giving them stones to throw. They're doing all these type of things they're teaching them aggression since they were small because they believe that they're being oppressed. And once you believe that you're being oppressed, then you're being oppressed. So they have this situation, they have this society that they've created. And it's never going to end until, either somebody turns one side or the other into glass. Somebody's going to have to bomb the other one into non-existence. But this is an eternal war. And it's not necessarily Muslims versus Jews. It's specifically Palestinians versus Israelis. Other Jews will support Israel because they feel like they have to. Other Muslims will support Palestine because they feel like they have to. But ultimately, what the United States made the mistake. And even though the United States has tried to give money and weapons to both sides, You have to ask the question, why? Why are they giving money and weapons to both sides? Stop giving people money and weapons, And I saw a lot of people say, like, none of this stuff happened under Donald Trump. It's only when Trump left that all of a sudden, Hamas is firing rockets and Israelis are rolling tanks through the streets. And I just looked at it and say, look, it ain't got nothing to do with Donald Trump. He tried to stop it, sure. He tried to get peace agreements, and I think he even got a few of them signed, sure. But the issue is always going to be the fact that there are Israelis or Jews in a Muslim area that Muslims believe belong to them. That's always going to be the issue until the Jews leave or get killed. That issue is going to exist. So there's no way for the United States to fix the issue. And I know that Israelis have tried to immigrate some Palestinians in. They gave them a seat in the government, and I know all that stuff. Like I said, it's an insanely complex issue. And maybe the Israelis are trying to babyface themselves when they're really the heels. Maybe it's the Palestinians who are trying to babyface themselves when they're really the heels. Ultimately, I don't live in that area, so I don't know. And I haven't studied this thing extensively. I just learned the skeletal structure of it. And that's about it, But do I think Sami Zayn will be fired? No. Do I think that you should cancel Gal Gadot? No. Ultimately, you have to. So ultimately, it boils down to, what do you think would happen if the Palestinians put their weapons down? What do you think would happen if the Israelis put their weapons down? Because this entire situation is a mixture of a lot of different arguments. There's the blood and soil argument of we were here first. We're the first people here. There's the Jewish versus Muslim argument. Then there's the weaponized state that, both of them have weaponized states because the average Muslim and the average Jew might, get along. But what are you going to do when your governments are fighting? The Palestinians voted in this government. What are they going to do? Is the government doing what the Palestinians want them to do? Who knows? Most people assume so, but I don't assume so, because when I look at what the fuck Joe Biden and all those guys are doing, I don't support that. So we have to take into account that there are going to be a lot of Palestinians who don't support this, and they're trapped in it. And there seems to be no real argument that Hamas started it and has been starting it. It's just about whether they should have started it or not. But that's another one of those issues where you have like the blood and soil argument, or, Israel has been supported by the United States and Canada and Great Britain for all these years. So you also have that occupation argument of, the Israelis were once occupied by the British, and then there were once the British left, they were occupied by the Jews, and they don't really have a country of their own. But Palestine never technically existed, which is true. It didn't exist. And you have that whole ordeal too. And Israel didn't always exist there either. I think Israel was formed in 1945, 46, 48 or something like that, in that area around World War II. So it's a very difficult situation to go into. But all it boils down to, do I think Sami Zayn will be fired? No. Should people be jumping up and down on Gal Gadot? No. Both of them are just supporting what they are. Gal Gadot is an Israeli citizen. I don't know if she's a Jew or not, but she's an Israeli citizen, a member of the IDF. That's her vision of what's happening and she doesn't want to, murder a bunch of Palestinian people. I think it's extreme for people to think that, but she's going to look at things from her perspective as a person who lived in Israel. And then when you have Sami Zayn, he's going to look at it from the perspective of a person who is of Muslim descent. What he was taught about this situation, what she was taught about this situation. Everybody else is just getting caught in the middle, like, Charlotte and people like you and me. When we make a comment on this stuff online, we're just caught in the middle, But the Israelis and the Jews have one view, and their view is that, the Muslims are terrorists. The Muslims and the Palestinians have another view, which is that the Jews are occupiers and yada, yada, yada. And you're not going to be able to shake people from that, right? The only question is going to be, how long can this continue to go on? It's been going on for almost 100 years already. How long is this going to continue to go on? You know? And when you ask people what would end it, some people will say, hey, maybe, Israel needs to go in there and take over. And I'm like, you're pretty much saying that they're going to kill all the Palestinians, or at least kill all the aggressive ones, which could end up being genocide. And then other people say, well, then the Jews need to leave. And I was like, well, can you then use talking about a Nazi-like expulsion of Jews out of their homeland? So when people are taking extreme positions like that, then you're never going to figure out how to fix the problem. But enough. I'll talk to you guys later, man. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. What would happen if the Jews put their weapons down, the Israelis put their weapons down? What do you think would happen if the Palestinians put their weapons down? And I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.